My brothers and sisters, there are moments in public life when the numbers feel so large, so triumphant, that even the most cynical heart wants to believe. 200,000 homes, 200,000 promises, 200,000 declarations that we, the city, the state, the government, had not only heard the cries for shelter, dignity, and stability, but had finally answered them. And I'll be honest with you, I wanted to believe too. I remember walking past construction sites where cranes cut into the skyline like monuments of hope. I remember ribbon cuttings plastered across the news, politicians standing in front of fresh drywall and spotless floors, declaring, "This is what progress looks like." And for a moment, you could almost feel it, the sensation that maybe, just maybe, we were turning a corner. That this time, the system had chosen to serve the people instead of the powerful. When they said affordable housing, it sounded like a moral victory. It sounded like a promise kept. And in a city where rent climbs like ivy up the walls of our lives, that word affordable lands like a prayer. But prayers, as many of us know, can be twisted. And words, especially political ones, can be stretched so far that they no longer resemble the truth. Still, in those early days, I let myself feel proud. I let myself imagine families unlocking new doors, parents finally exhaling, elders resting without fear of eviction, children doing homework at a kitchen table rather than the backseat of a car. I imagined a city where stability wasn't a luxury but a birthright. That's the thing about hope. It comes to us honestly, but it can be taken dishonestly. And before I knew it, before any of us knew it, the shine began to dim. Because every triumph casts a shadow, and when I stepped into that shadow, when I looked closely, really closely, at what we had built, I saw the fine print. And the fine print was louder than the promise. This, my brothers and sisters, is where the story truly begins, not in celebration, but at the first crack in the foundation. I've learned something over the years. Injustice rarely announces itself at full volume. It whispers. It hides in quiet places. It lives in technicalities, in footnotes, in the language most of us never get to read, and even fewer get to question. And so when I started hearing from neighbors, from organizers, from working families across the city that these so-called affordable units were still wildly out of reach, I felt that whisper again. That familiar tremor in the air that says something's wrong here. At first, I thought maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe there was confusion about eligibility. Maybe there were delays, backlog, oversights, administrative errors, the usual culprits that haunt any bureaucratic system. But no. The deeper I looked, the stranger the numbers became. A one-bedroom apartment listed as affordable, priced for someone making $80,000. A studio, branded as below market, set aside for incomes that 3, 4, 5 times exceeded what most residents in the surrounding neighborhood earned. And that word affordable kept ringing in my head like a broken bell. Because affordable to whom? Affordable to the grandfather who worked the night shift for 40 years, but now lives on a fixed income? Affordable to the single mother cleaning offices downtown while her children sleep? Affordable to the immigrant family sharing a small apartment with another family just to survive? Or affordable only to those who already had choices? The numbers didn't add up, not morally, not mathematically, not humanly. And then there was the average, the citywide area median income, or AMI, a number that looks objective, scientific, neutral. But in reality, it is a number bloated by incomes from wealthy neighborhoods miles away from the communities these units were supposedly designed to serve. You take the wage of someone barely scraping by in the Bronx, and you mix it with the salary of a banker in Lower Manhattan, and suddenly you have an average that describes nobody, reflects nobody, and serves nobody. That's the trick. That's the sleight of hand. You can manipulate a number more easily than you can manipulate a conscience. So the city declared victory. Developers declared success. Reporters declared progress. And yet, families were still getting eviction notices. Rents were still rising. Shelters were still overflowing. And people were still asking, if these homes are affordable, why are none of us living in them? It was a simple question. The kind of question anyone might ask. But simple questions are dangerous when systems depend on complicated answers. And even then, even as the contradictions piled up, I still didn't know the half of it. Because the truth, the real truth, wasn't in the numbers. It was in the fine print. And once I read it, the entire illusion shattered. My brothers and sisters, there is a particular kind of silence that falls when you finally uncover a truth that was never meant to be found. It is not the silence of peace. It is the silence that comes when your breath catches, when your stomach tightens, when your faith in the system tilts and threatens to fall. That was the silence I felt the first time I held the paperwork in my hands. It looked harmless. A few pages of definitions, eligibility criteria, formulas, clauses. But sometimes the most destructive things arrive dressed in harmlessness. I read the words affordable housing, printed in bold letters across the top of the page. But just beneath it, in smaller print, in softer ink, in the language of loopholes, was its true meaning. You see, what they call affordable is not tied to your income, not tied to your neighborhood, not tied to the lived realities of the people these homes were supposedly built for. It was tied, instead, to a formula engineered to justify the unjustifiable. Developers could charge rents that working families could never touch and still get tax breaks, still get subsidies, still get praise. The fine print revealed trick after trick. Units counted as affordable, even when priced higher than the median rent of the neighborhood. Units labeled low income that required incomes twice as high as the local average. Units reserved for people who, let's be honest, were never the ones crowding tenant meetings, never the ones fearing eviction, never the ones choosing between groceries and rent. The deeper I read, the more I realized the word affordable had been hollowed out and repurposed as a marketing strategy, a way to soothe public anger, not to serve public need. Every clause was a quiet betrayal, and it was designed that way. Because if the truth were spoken plainly, if someone simply said, "We built 200,000 units that most of you will never afford," there would have been outrage. There would have been protest. There would have been accountability. But bureaucracy is a master illusionist. It hides the truth behind acronyms, behind legalese, behind formulas so complex that most people give up before they reach the bottom of the page. I didn't give up. I kept reading. And when I finished, I realized something even more devastating. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. It was a system built with intention. A system that allowed our city's greatest housing crisis to become someone else's greatest business opportunity. The fine print wasn't a footnote. It was the blueprint. And the blueprint had nothing to do with justice or dignity or the simple human right to a home. It had everything to do with profit. Every time I thought about the families who believed in these units, who applied, who waited, who hoped, I felt the weight of that betrayal settle deeper into my chest. Because hope deserves honesty. And in this system, hope had been weaponized. And so, with the fine print exposed, with the scales finally falling from my eyes, I knew the question we needed to ask next. If these homes weren't built for us, then who were they built for? When I was young, I thought systems broke because no one cared enough to fix them. But as I've grown, as I've listened, as I've watched how decisions are made in rooms without windows and halls without echoes, I've learned something far more unsettling. Some systems are not broken. They're working exactly as designed. And housing in this city, in this country, is one of them. So when I looked at the fine print, I didn't just see misaligned definitions or flawed math. I saw a series of incentives, carefully crafted, quietly maintained, fiercely protected. I saw developers who received subsidies for units they knew most residents could never touch. I saw politicians eager to cut ribbons but hesitant to challenge the donors who funded their campaigns. I saw consultants who turned poverty into a spreadsheet, who translated human struggle into neat little tables that justify the unjustifiable. I saw a machine that rewards profit while punishing poverty. A machine that runs not on compassion, but on loopholes. Not on justice, but on efficiency. Not on care, but on calculation. And every part of that machine has a beneficiary. Some benefit through tax credits, some through land deals, some through political capital. But in all of this, in the millions spent and the millions earned, the people at the heart of the crisis remain untouched by the promises made in their name. Let me tell you something hard. Whenever a system produces pain, consistently, predictably, and disproportionately, that pain is not an accident. It is the outcome of choices made by people with power for people with power. And so the question, who benefits, is not rhetorical. It is the key to understanding why 200,000 affordable units can exist while hundreds of thousands remain unhoused, underhoused, or one missed paycheck away from catastrophe. The answer is not a mystery, but it is a mirror some in power would rather we never hold up. Because when you follow the incentives, the pattern becomes clear. Housing was not built to shelter us. It was built to enrich them. And once you see that truth, truly see it, you cannot unsee it. You begin to understand why the same neighborhoods face the same pressure year after year. Why the same communities are displaced generation after generation. Why the same families struggle while the same corporations thrive. As we move forward in this story, my brothers and sisters, we must do so with open eyes. Because the system we're examining is not just a policy failure, it is a moral failure, meticulously crafted and carefully maintained. And to confront it, we need to understand not just its mechanics, but its human cost. My brothers and sisters, numbers can tell you how many units were built. They can tell you how much money was spent. They can tell you the square footage, the zoning code, the income requirement printed neatly beside each affordable home. But numbers cannot tell you what it feels like to be turned away. They cannot tell you the weight a mother carries when she checks her bank account at the end of the month and knows it will never stretch far enough. They cannot tell you the quiet shame of a father who fills out application after application, only to see rejection letters addressed not to him, but to an income bracket he has never set foot in. I have walked through neighborhoods where children can recite the names of shelters like they're train stops. I have sat with elders who watched their entire buildings empty out around them, every neighbor replaced by a stranger who can afford what they cannot. Let me tell you about Maria. She's a home health aide, the person who shows up when the rest of the world forgets. She cares for the sick, the aging, the dying. And yet, after 12-hour shifts, after caring for others with tenderness and patience, she returns not to a home of her own, but to a couch in her sister's living room. When she applied for an affordable unit, she was told the minimum income requirement was higher than her annual salary. Imagine that. Too poor to qualify for affordable housing. Then there's Abdul and Samira, a couple who immigrated here believing this city, flawed as it is, could offer their daughter a future. They live in a single room carved out of a larger apartment, separated by a thin curtain that gives the illusion of privacy, but none of its dignity. They applied too. They prayed. They waited. And the response? Their income was insufficient. Insufficient for the home they were told was built for them. There are thousands of stories like these, stories of families living in basements, of children doing homework under flickering lights, of workers who build our city but cannot afford to live in it. And every time one of these families is denied an affordable home, the wound deepens. Not just the wound of housing insecurity, but the wound of betrayal, the wound of being told one thing and shown another. You see, the human cost is not just measured in dollars or rent burdens. It is measured in heartbreak, in instability, in the erosion of trust. When a city lies to its people about something as fundamental as shelter, it doesn't just break promises. It breaks people. And the worst part? None of this happened overnight. None of this was sudden. It was built piece by piece, policy by policy, decade by decade. Which brings us to the hardest truth of all. Every crisis has a history. And if you trace the history of housing in this city, you do not find a smooth path or a fair system. You find scars. Redlining that carved neighborhoods along racial lines and locked generations out of homeownership. Disinvestment that starved entire communities of opportunity. Urban renewal that bulldozed black and brown homes in the name of progress. Speculation that turned neighborhoods into playgrounds for capital, not communities. These weren't accidents. They were choices, deliberate, documented, devastating. And each choice left behind a residue. A stain that seeped into the next policy, the next program, the next definition of affordable. You see, affordability didn't become distorted overnight. It was slowly reshaped by decades of policies that prioritized growth over justice, profit over people, and expedience over equity. For years, we tied affordability not to the wages of local residents, but to regional incomes inflated by wealth far from the neighborhoods being served. For years, we ceded public responsibility to private developers, trusting them to do what the public good demanded, even as history told us they wouldn't. For years, we let the market lead, even though the market has no memory, no moral compass, no obligation to the communities it consumes. This is the architecture of the rig system we inherited. A structure built on exclusion. A structure built on inequity. A structure built on the idea that some people are worth housing and others are worth displacing. And yet, despite all this history, despite all this injustice, despite all the forces aligned to keep the system as it is, the people have never stopped fighting. Organizers, tenants, advocates, and families have pushed back again and again, refusing to be erased, refusing to be invisible, refusing to accept a system that treats them as collateral damage. And that, my brothers and sisters, is why this moment matters. Because when we confront the crisis of affordability today, we are not just confronting the failures of the present. We are confronting the legacy of decisions that shaped our city long before many of us were born. And if we want to build something better, something humane, something worthy of the people, we must understand not only the system we have, but the system we deserve. My brothers and sisters, after walking through the hollow corridors of the system we inherited, after tracing each crack back to its source, I found myself asking a simple, profound question. What should affordability truly mean? Not what the fine print says, not what the formulas claim, not what the developers argue, but what does affordability mean to a human being, to a family, to a community that has carried this city on its back for generations? Real affordability is not a percentage on a spreadsheet. It is not a calculation based on someone else's wealth. It is not a number inflated by incomes from neighborhoods you have never walked, never lived in, never struggled within. Real affordability begins with the people who actually live in a community, with their wages, their costs, their realities. It means a home affordable to the teacher shaping our children's minds, to the delivery worker who brings our meals through wind and rain, to the grandmother raising a second generation because life demanded resilience she never asked for, to the young couple beginning their lives in a city they love, even as the city pushes them to its margins. It means recognizing that housing is not a commodity first, it is a right, a foundation, a sacred space where dreams are protected, families are nurtured, and futures are built. Imagine a system where affordability is tied directly to local wages, not inflated averages. Imagine homes built not for maximum profit, but for maximum dignity. Imagine a city where the people who make our neighborhoods vibrant, who make our streets safe, who make our culture rich, can actually afford to stay. We have models that prove this is possible. Community land trusts, where the land is held in common, not hoarded for speculation. Nonprofit housing built not to satisfy shareholders, but to shelter human beings. Public housing, real public housing, where government invests in the people instead of outsourcing responsibility to private profit motives. These are not fantasies. They exist. They work. They are the fragments of a better world, scattered across our city and our country, waiting to be woven into something larger. Because when affordability is defined honestly, it does more than shelter bodies. It shelters hope. And once hope is sheltered, nurtured, protected, it grows into something even more powerful, a blueprint for change. My brothers and sisters, when a system is rigged, as this one is, the first instinct is often despair. A system so large, so entrenched, so protected, how can we possibly change it? But here's the truth. Systems are powerful, yes, but people are more powerful still. Every policy we critique was written by human hands. Every loophole was designed by human minds. Every injustice was sustained by human choices. And what people have made, people can unmake. So what does a just blueprint look like? It starts with grounding affordability in the actual incomes of the communities being housed, not a regional average, not a manipulated statistic, but the lived economic reality of the people who call that neighborhood home. Next, we must shift power away from profit-driven developers and toward the public good. That means expanding social housing, publicly built, publicly owned, publicly accountable. It means supporting community land trusts that remove land from speculation permanently. It means investing in nonprofit housing models where success is measured not in revenue, but in stability and dignity. We must also strengthen tenant protections, because building new homes means nothing if current residents are pushed out before they can benefit. No more loopholes that allow landlords to harass, neglect, or price out families. No more incentives that reward displacement. And finally, we must demand transparency, real transparency. No more fine print hidden behind bureaucratic walls. No more systems designed to confuse, to obscure, to exhaust. A just housing system is one that people can understand, one they can navigate, one they can trust. This blueprint is not radical. What is radical is the idea that we can continue as we have been, that we can call something affordable when the people cannot afford it, that we can call something progress when families remain one crisis away from homelessness. The blueprint for justice exists. All we must do now is build it. My brothers and sisters, there comes a moment in every struggle when the truth becomes too clear to ignore. A moment when the illusion cracks wide open, And what stands behind it is no longer a mystery, but a mandate. This is that moment. Because once you see the discrepancy between what was promised and what was delivered, once you see how the word affordable was bent, stretched, twisted into something unrecognizable, once you see how families were left knocking on doors they were assured would open, you cannot walk away unchanged. The story of these 200,000 homes is not just a story of policy failure. It is a story of moral failure, and moral failures demand moral responses. When I picture those shimmering new buildings rising across our skyline, I no longer see symbols of victory. I see mirrors held up to the very soul of our city, asking us who we truly are. Are we a place that allows bureaucratic definitions to override human need? Are we a place that celebrates numbers on a press release while families pack their entire lives into plastic bags and hope for the best? Are we a place that calls something affordable simply because it is politically convenient? Or are we a place that truly believes that housing is a human right? Because if we believe that, then we must build like we mean it. We must build homes that working families can actually afford. We must build systems that center the people, not the profit. We must build policies rooted in reality, not perception. And most importantly, we must build trust again. Trust that when we say affordable, we mean affordable. Trust that when we invest public money, it serves the public good. Trust that when we promise homes, those homes will welcome, not reject, the very people they were meant for. This is not a fight for statistics. It is a fight for dignity, for honesty, for a future where no one has to read the fine print to know if they belong. And that future is closer than it seems. Because once the truth is spoken aloud, once the illusion is dismantled, the path forward becomes undeniable. We build what we were promised, and we demand nothing less. My brothers and sisters, if you've stayed with me through every chapter of this story, through the hope, the disillusionment, the fine print, the betrayal, the history, and the blueprint, then you know this is not a tale of despair. It is a tale of awakening. For too long, our city has been caught between two realities. The one printed on glossy brochures, and the one lived by working families. The one praised in official reports, and the one whispered about in crowded apartments. The one celebrated by those who benefit from the system, and the one mourned by those who survive it. But today, right now, we are closing the gap between those two realities. Because the greatest change begins not with policy, or architecture, or budgets, but with truth. Truth spoken clearly. Truth spoken collectively. Truth spoken without fear. And the truth is this: we deserve better. Our families deserve better. Our city deserves better. We deserve homes built with care, not calculation. We deserve definitions rooted in humanity, not in loopholes. We deserve a system that measures success by the well-being of its people, not by the profits it protects. And while the journey ahead is long, while the forces aligned against justice are formidable and well-funded, while the obstacles may tempt us toward resignation, there is something stronger than all of that. Us. Ordinary people who refuse to accept injustice as the cost of living. Neighbors who look out for each other. Workers who carry this city on their shoulders every day. Families who may struggle but never stop fighting for home. This collective spirit is the foundation upon which real change is built.